All right, here we go. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Seminar. I'm Dr. Stam. Thank you for coming. This is great. I'm really excited today to bring our speaker to us. This is our, I think, fourth in a series of 5 for this term. Should be pretty great. Today we have Dalya Manatova from IU. She is a Ph.D. candidate where she studies social organizational dynamics of cybercrime. And she's here to talk to us about some of the research that she's been doing. Looks like Russian eCrime. I'm really excited. Can you tell us a little bit about this? So let's welcome Dalya.
All right. Can you hear me? OK. Hi, everyone. Again, yeah, I'm a Ph.D. student from Indiana University. And I study, like, my major is security informatics. And I have domain knowledge in security. But I also like computationally trained. But I was interested in the topics how we solve the problem with eCrime or cybercrime. And it turns out that it's a very complex problem. And we should look at it from different dimensions. So a little bit about me. I am, again, a PhD student. I study dynamics of eCrime, networks, exploring their information, evolution, and governance. In my research and overall in my whole life, I am driven by problems, but I really like to understand the problem first. So before trying to solve the problem, let's try and understand what's going on, right? All right, so in this talk, I would like you to look at the problem of cybercrime, understand it from sociotechnical perspective. Look at it as a complex system that have different dimensions. So there's a technical dimension, which is pretty typical. What kind of technologies eCrimers are using, code, vulnerabilities, how they develop exploits, how they infiltrate the infrastructure, how they build infrastructure of botnets, and essentially, eventually today, how they use AI. And then there's a social component of it. So essentially, those are people. They need to communicate. They need to collaborate. They need to build connections. So that's all in the social dimension. Then we have this organizational dimension. So apart from collaborating with people, you need to figure out how to organize your action, how to organize the skills that you have and the experience that you have to actually build your crime careers. Economical, essentially, too, where all the money flows, all the profit and money laundering techniques that criminals are using. There's also a dimension of cultural background, which is also very important. The cultural context that those people are interacting in brings the glue of the shared knowledge, understanding, norms, and even like bonding and trust that is built between the participants of eCrime. I'm sure there's more dimension, but this is like 5 core. And a brief outline of my talk for today. I will walk you through what we know about eCrime communities and participants. I also will talk about where we are right now in eCrime as a problem. And I will introduce you to the major current threat, which is ransomware. And we will delve into one of the major ransomware gangs out there. So what do we know about the eCrime communities? Well, we know they tend to cluster in specific forums. They build those communities online, just like every other people out there build communities of neighborhoods or communities by education. They build it online. They tend to cluster in those forums by topics, by specific crime topics, by the specific type of crime, or even by language. So we have like carding forums where people sharing expertise how to do carding frauds, tax frauds, hacking, which is also divided by different languages, radical communities, illegal obtained data. I don't know if you're familiar with this newly formed pro-BIV forums where people are sharing, basically doxing someone else's information. Illicit substances, basically everything related to drug drug abuse and illicit substance abuse. Well, what we also know that there's tend to be an overlap between those users and communities, and it's really hard to measure this overlap because people usually involved in one type of crime could also be involved in a different type of crime. For example, this is a typical technique for SIM swapping. How many of you know what a SIM swapping is? Okay, so that's essentially when you are, let's say, have a banking account and you have a number attached to it. Someone wants to steal your banking credentials, but they need the number. So they changed the number for their number, and here it is, the swim swapping. Back in the day, how it used to be done, usually there was different types of vulnerabilities in the systems that they abused, but now with the security patching, it's kind of hard now. But even so, they used to social engineer operators to do that, like, oh, I lost my number, this is my new number, and so on, and give like basic information about the client. But even that is hard with all the training. So that's where this eCrime spills into physical crime. Now there are different services that people can exchange in those forums. For example, the easiest way as a physical conventional crime, just to steal the tablet from the retail workers. So someone goes in who gets paid for that, steals the tablet, and quickly changes the numbers in this like short window of before the tablet gets locked. And that service is called remote snatching. Another way to do is to find someone who actually works in this retail department and basically recruit them. So here we see this interconnection between physical crime and e-crime. And even in our research, we try to look and measure how much there is interconnectedness and differences between those types of crime. And we found out that there's a lot of overlap and a lot of interconnectedness between three major types of crime. Physical, which is more conventional, like selling drugs or selling guns. Transitional, where we have like instantiation of both online crime and physical crime. Usually that is carding, tax fraud. And then online, which is pure hacking, pure online abuse. Turns out that there's a lot of overlap, a lot of interconnectedness. And if you want to read more about it, there's a paper out there. I'm not going to like delve into this right now. So how would a typical forum, underground forum would look like? Like a typical Reddit forum, nothing really different, except it might not be listed, indexed on the surface web. So we have like someone is posting, someone is replying with a comment, and so on. There's usually also ads and commercials on different parts, and also post itself could be a commercial of something, like a service. So what we know, we know that although those forums are forums as a structure, they are treated as marketplaces. This is an example of arbitration thread in the Russian forum, where people are selling different services or arbitrating specific transactions. So people are treating forums as a place, as a community to brand their services and to market their services. And essentially, that led to forums create a whole infrastructure, they call it escrow services, where they provide the service for transacting for the services. All right, so what we also know is that such forums essentially have admins and moderators, and those moderators and admins govern such spaces, but they also themselves involved in the same type of crime. This is a famous case of the Russian forum raid administrator who himself was also involved in the ransomware operators. And this is the screenshot from FBI. We also know that forums get disrupted. And when they get disrupted by law enforcement, they usually assemble back in the new forums and new online spaces. And the same thing happens with all the groups that also get disrupted. They usually assemble back. This is an example of the famous Alphabet, the drug forum. In 2017, it got disrupted. It was a huge, massive disruption attack and down by the law enforcement and FBI. Actually, several countries' law enforcement agencies. So eventually, Alphabet came back. And turns out that even more infrastructure of Alphabet is even more robust. What do we know about eCrime participants? eCrime participants build communities online through different platforms and forums. So they don't just hang out in one place. They reach out to different forums, different platforms like a Discord, Telegram, Jabber forums, and stuff like that. They also utilize multiple anonymous identities. So if you are, for example, you use social media, you have a username. In this case, cybercriminals will use different identities attached to such usernames. So they build branding to such identities. So essentially, this is from the actual interview, someone is mentioning they use several nicknames for different types of services they provide. And That one specifically uses the business strategy where he advertises his services under different nicknames to his clients. So that makes sense, right? Okay. So eCrime participants also build trust over repeated interactions. Mostly they don't meet offline, so everything that they do business through online interactions, and the more they repeat those interactions, the more they create this bond, this trust between each other. And they signal trust with shared background, shared knowledge, cultural background, and language. There's essentially this whole literature explaining how Russian criminals usually tend to signal each other with language that they're in the same space. And if someone is infiltrating or trying to set him up as a Russian speaker himself, different things or different nuances in the language can actually tell the person is not a Russian speaker. And that signals the trust too. So eCrime communities have their own social system that is built by those participants. And through different interactions, they build essentially natural connections, friendships. They also build hierarchies because this is just a social system as we have in an offline situation. We also have hierarchies. We have connections imposed by structure. They have reputation and social validations. In a lot of those forums, they create this reputation system where you can get this reputation score by paying or by actually being active in the community and gaining trust of your peers. And essentially, they build this pattern of communication, which could be observed if we look at the whole collection of the forum and see how these patterns are mapped out. And those patterns tell us actual behavior of those interactions. And this is a screenshot how you can get different reputation systems, reputation scores in those systems. So essentially, eCrime communities are also organizations. We need to understand that eCrimes are not just collection of hackers sitting in the basement. So far, it is such industrialized nature that it's become organizations. So they have their own roles, they have their own tasks, they have scale, deciding who they're going to attack, low-hanging fruits victims or actually big critical infrastructures. Scope also is important for them. They can provide a very specific booter services, which is DDoS only, or they can build a range of activities for RAS operation, ransomware as a service. They also build social networks, actual communication patterns, as I mentioned before, and that all as an organization, they build resilience, the ability to adapt to the environment, ability to avoid specific nuances, and whenever they're disrupted, come back. So research suggests that hierarchy and partnership is facilitating this resilience and sophistication. This research is by Jonathan Lusthouse. He was looking at the old group, Gauzy Group, which is also a Russian-based group. He was producing a while ago banking Trojans, but collecting a lot of interviews with former criminals who knew the members of the group and also law enforcement. They mapped out the structure, how the group was governing. We see that there's a boss in the center. There's at least 3 network administrators, because to run a business, a criminal business, you need a critical infrastructure for it, and you essentially need a network to do that. Main coder, and then someone who actually inject writers, and the bulletproof hosting. This is what the industrial cybersecurity firms think of the major ransomware, again, to be mapped as a hierarchy as. So they see this executive suite, and then they see that the HR, someone who's actually recruiting people to the group, people that are dealing with finances, and people that are working on negotiating and acquisition of the different other groups. And essentially R&D, which actually works on the product, on the malware product. So as you can see, it's a whole business, and it runs as an e-commerce, or someone would say organization of boring jobs, because that's essentially just jobs in an illegal environment. A firm enterprise or a partnership of enterprises. Although in some of the countries, this resilience of eCrime business is built not just by running as an e-commerce business model, but also it receives support from state. Latest research from Karen shows that Russian-based ransomware groups started attacking right after the invasion of Ukraine. And we can see those spikes in her paper. So the major question I am trying to pursue in my studies and my research, to what extent so-called organized cybercrime is truly organized? Well, yeah, ransomware has been a huge problem. It's a top threat in cybersecurity currently. Demands keep rising. The ransom demands keep rising year to year. And only 12% of incidents actually include zero-day exploits, which means unless we don't patch, we will still keep getting those ransomware attacks. An 85% increase in the number of victims who had their names and other details leaked on the dark web leak sites. So to those who don't know how the whole attack works, there's an attacker over here, your computer or infrastructure, the whole infrastructure of different computers. And you receive a link, and you click the link, and then essentially, well, the malware unpacks itself and executes, and then sends the commands to CC communication server, downloads the public key, and then that's when encryption starts. And then essentially when you get the dev screen. That's when you get this message on the screen saying, oh, your all important files are now encrypted, stolen, pay us, otherwise you will lose everything. And this is the actual screen. And then sometimes you even have a countdown, like kind of like pressure you, right? And then you have to imagine like a whole company that is facing such attack is under pressure. And essentially, there's a victim support. So it's to the point that it's so organized. They have those victim support teams that tell you, hey, you've been attacked, and we're here to help you. And it essentially guides you through the process of negotiating the payment and how you're supposed to pay, because you're not just paying to a bank account, you're paying with Bitcoins. And in most of the cases, I doubt the company has a Bitcoin wallet. So you have to figure out how to do that. So all of it gives, like, the whole business of eCrime brings those guidance how to do that, to make sure that this process is smooth as possible for you to pay the ransom. They also tell you not to go to law enforcement and not to go to insurance companies or negotiators, because you will lose time. Remember? So you lose time and no one's going to help you. Only they have actual decryption keys. All right, so let's look at one of the major ransomware groups now, Conti. So by far, it's most successful group, and it's been living for quite a while. The group reassembles effectively back, although we cannot really trace the beginning or formation of the group, but we can speculate, and based on different collection of incident report and analyst report, 2014 probably could mark the beginning of the group. When they started with this banking Trojans. And then essentially got disrupted by law enforcement in Russia because US asked them to. But again, Russian law enforcement is not really law enforcement for cyber criminals as long as you're not targeting Russian companies in Russia. So there's a term for that, privateering. So as long as you're not attacking Russian-based companies, you're good. No one's going to touch you in Russia. So essentially, they formed the group and exhibited, and seems like if you compare the different codes and binaries of the code, seems like the similarities with the new group Dyer appeared, and the developers teams basically moved to a new group. Then the new group appeared, Ryuk ransomware. It was a big while ago, and then eventually sort of got disrupted, shut down, and then Conti appeared, which informally in the forums, they just called it Ryuk 2.0, which was the same group. And in 2002, when the Russian invasion in Ukraine started, you have to understand that even though the group is Russian-based, it's also very diverse. Not all of them are Russians, and essentially not all of them support the Ukraine. Not all of them support the war. So it created this argument in the group because the group officially declared support of Russia, and one of the people, who is now a researcher, leaked the data set, leaked the whole information about the group to the public. But do you think the group just got disrupted, shut down, and disappeared? No. They continued the business, and actually in April, they attacked Costa Rican government. And then eventually they did shut down, but they just reappeared again in 2023 as different groups like Karakurt. And it seems like in 2024, researchers see resemblance in other groups too. So as you can see, yeah, the group still exists, as a core member still exist. So what about the state supporting, state aligned? Yeah, there are groups that are state supported, and they execute attack on the behalf of the government or the state. But in this case, this is a little different. This is not state supported, this is state supporting or state aligned. The government itself is not playing a huge role in here, it just exists as external factor. And this is, as external factor, the groups just have to make sure that they acknowledge the existence of the state. So this is an official warning on the official website of Conti saying, hey, our team is officially announcing full support of Russian government. Do you think this is this announcement is for everyone? This is more for the government itself, like, hey, we are supporting you, just don't touch us. But if this happened on February 25th of 2022, before that we didn't even know how Conti is aligned with state. But if we look at the leaked chats and look at conversations, with regional expert, we can pick the nuances of the conversation and realize, oh, the group actually used to work with the government for quite a while. For example, the mentioning of this address, which just looks like a normal address, right? But the person who is a regional expert will pick up right away that this is a FSB agent office in St. Petersburg. And this is a map from Yandex, which is the sort of like a Google Maps in Russia. Also, discussions include the journalist, just mention the journalist Alexei. Yeah, again, like original expert pick up right away that some of the requests regarding the journalist Alexei Navalny from Bellingcat journalists were coming from state to execute on their behalf to this group. We can also see through the humor context how a group is reacting to different events. For example, this is a happy holiday cyber troop, let's beat the aimers, is the message that was appeared in the chats on the Fatherland Defenders Day, which is a big holiday in Russia. The choice of words is actually very important in Russian. So it's a Defenders Day, right? But they're mentioning cyber troops, so mentioning that the cyberspace is a new war now. They also say, let's beat the aimers, but in original language, they actually use word bend, which sort of gives this like homophobic violence flair into this text, and essentially aligns with the specific domestic political ideology and informs the next target selection, which is Americans. All right, so just to tell you, this is all nuance analysis, linguistic analysis that cannot be picked up by machine translation or basic NLP methods. So we also can see that sometimes those shared understanding and goals might not be so aligned with all the members. In this case, the same happy holiday message, someone replied, oh yeah, all who are involved are not, but peace to all of us, let's the bot fight, we have more power over them. And those parentheses actually mean smiles, and if you're a Russian speaker texter, you know the 2 smiles are actually extra, it's too much. So in this case, it's sort of a hedging, sort of like smoothing the situation. So the person disagrees with the political subtext, but make sure he smooths the situation with this hedging, de-escalating smile. So in general, you can read more about it, like how analysis of the messages requires more than translation or simple NLP approach, and how sometimes all of those nuances missed, but are important in the analysis. Yeah, those are some of the examples. I think my favorite one is over here, when they mentioned this Counter-Strike game, and it's just missed by the translation. And yeah, here's more. Anyways, so if we don't look at the messages and just look for the interaction of those group messages, we can build a social graph or like a social network of those people. And we right away see the 5 major members of the group. The sort of a so-known founder, the old person there, someone who is operational security guru, someone who seems to be a payment processor. So we did some statistical analysis of the different scores for each of the member, and we see 3 different distributions quite clearly and significantly. And we see that managers are highly connected to many nodes, and sort of through their interactions, we see they are managers. Then we see the clear distribution of upper level members. Those are having longer lifespan than those lower level members, but also the upper level members having higher clustering coefficients, which means they're very interconnected with each other. And those lower level members are technically having high turnover rate and little connectivity, and most likely those are contractors or those like people that are asked to do a specific type of job for a specific type of attack. So we already see those 3 tiers, right? So there's sort of organization there is. Okay, so we can see cybercrime groups are entrepreneurial organizations. So let's actually study them as such. And in the organizational literature, when people study firms and typical companies and what makes the firm or organization resilient and how a company makes a successful living for years, they talk about hierarchical structure, they talk about specialization, like a specific division of tasks for specific roles. They talk about rules and norms, they talk about relationship and shared goals. Well, let's look at the relationships here. So we decided, okay, so language can actually give us relationships that are built in the group. And we divide the relationship in major 3 types from the literature, but we add one more. So we see that influence could be influenced by authority or by knowledge, which is mentorship or advice. So in this study, we use friendship, workflow, routine, authority, when essentially we can see clear hierarchy, and advice and mentorship. All right, so what are we doing then? Well, we decided that let's do more rigorous analysis closer to the actual text. And we use this method of computer-mediated discourse analysis. We annotate each message, each utterance of the message or conversation unit with linguistic analysis. And if you're a Russian speaker, if you're using the word you or addressing someone with you, in Russian actually oops. This is not good. Sorry. Okay. So if you are a Russian speaker, you probably know that there's formal and informal addressings. And that's essentially how you can infer this hierarchy. And that's not the only way to infer hierarchy. We can also infer for frequency of reciprocity of the small talk. So for example, if someone is constantly trying to do a small talk with you, you as a person who is in a higher authoritative position, you have this luxury of not replying to this small talk. Or sometimes not even replying to the message because you don't feel pressure to reply. So essentially, we kind of decompose this conversation in different parts. And we try to infer different types of relationships and like calculate this confidence interval based on those codes of distribution. So again, like if there's no reciprocity in small talk, or there's no reply, or there's directives in the speech acts, or in the negotiations, they're dictating of terms and so on, or even if a tone is commanding, we can infer that the relationship is authoritative. And the other way around is too. So whenever someone is apologetic or seems to be more polite or hedging, it tells us something. It tells us there's probably some inference of authority. Also, inference of mentorship is pretty easy. So if someone is requesting for help or references to someone's expertise, we can infer that this is a relationship of mentorship or advice. And if someone is providing help, this is also mentorship, which is also a very important relationship in the social network. Friendship is pretty straightforward. So whenever there's informal, super informal addressing, whenever there's a lot of small talk, and when people are sharing their own personal information and personal opinions, this is where we start inferring this friendship relationship. So essentially the idea is, okay, we map the social network with different types of relationships. So what? How do we do it? How do we measure the structure of this group? So we refer to this Krakauer's 4 dimensions. You don't really need to know it, but do some math and you calculate this hierarchical 4 measures of hierarchy in the graph, and then we eventually can find out how much hierarchy in the structure there is in the group based on different types of relationships. And it's still in the process. We're still working on the labeling part, but this is essentially how the initial social graph of a developer might look like. We color-coded some nodes, so the green is leader or a manager, and then there's a provider, the botnet provider, and then essentially blue are just specialists. If you don't see even a small, tiny, thin line, that means the person never interacted with that person. But we see that this authority, this manager definitely is authority for this developer. But we also see there's some sort of a friendship there, two-way friendship. And interestingly, the person is seeking advice and mentorship from a different person here. All right? So yeah, that's one way of looking at it. What we can also do, just looking at the chats, we can figure out what kind of process that each person and member is involved. By extracting themes and topics of the work routines that are involved, we can see and infer those roles, implicitly mentioned roles, or actually see how much they're involved in the specific workflow. So sometimes they do mention things like, oh, he'll be testing this file for you, or he'll be ordering AVs for you, and so on. Or sometimes we can just see the way they interact, exchange the files, and how someone will say, oh, I tested it, here it is. So we can see, okay, the guy is tester, and so on. And that's how probably a day-to-day business might look like. And I don't want to bore you with this graph. The only thing I want to say, there's different types of roles, and the list keeps growing probably. There's more. If you want to talk about different types of role, we can do it after. But I think the most important part I want to talk about is that understanding factors in destabilizing eCrime communities required us to know different dimensions, not just technical. We need to understand that cultural knowledge is important, and we should leverage this for division of the group. We also need to identify critical roles in the specific crimes, depending on what type of crime, what type of business it is. And target low-value criminals, but on critical paths. For example, people in this critical infrastructure that are essentially involved on the path, that are not as much security trained as anyone else as a developer, would probably be a good target. And essentially fish back and attack friendships and different types of relationships, not just picking the most top ones, the leaders of the group. Because essentially groups will reform back, assemble back, and nothing will change. And this is pretty much the end of my talk, but I would like to hear your questions and comments and talk more.
Time for questions. I just ask that if you've got a question, raise your hand so I can bring you a mic. All right. We're going to see how much we can get me to run.
My question is, what are some of the reasons why you would be interested in the social hierarchies and relationships between these eCrime groups?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not mentioning this on this in this talk, in this slide. But eventually, when we know how relationships are built, we can observe them in the forums, and maybe for different types of algorithms that are called the community detection algorithms, we can find the emerging groups because we already know what kind of relationships they're building. Yeah.
So you might have said this already, but how exactly did you get all this data for like one-to-one conversations between people?
That is thanks to the leak.
Oh, okay, that
Data
link
leak.
right. Okay, thanks.
Did I bore you all? Why are you so quiet?
You said that you got a lot of one-on-one conversations from the data leak. What other kinds of information did you get from the data leak? Like, did you get financial information or just conversations?
That's actually a good question. So the data leak is pretty big. So it's not just conversations. It's training materials because, believe it or not, they have to hire people and they have to make sure that they know what the new hires are doing. So there are training materials in terms of like how to log into a specific server, what is the password, and so on. There's also some of the samples of the binaries of the code. Not all of it, but some samples of it. And through the interactions, we can extract the Bitcoin addresses because essentially when they ask for a payment, all the payments are going through Bitcoin addresses. So extracting those Bitcoin addresses, we can see the money flow information inside the group. But yeah, there's a paper actually just doing that. Yeah, if you're interested, I can give it to you.
How effective would you say counter-phishing attacks are against eCrime groups?
I can't comment on that, honestly. I know that they do exist, and I eventually think if we find a critical role and critical path, it actually would work. For example, in my ideas like testers, those are the ones who are like test the code, but also test the encryption. And they're just people that are hired in a low-paying job position, and they're probably the most critical on the path, but also very not securely trained. So phishing on them probably will be the most effective one. And who knows, maybe they store the decryption key in their text files, and then you can get the decryption key.
I'm just curious if you saw any evidence of attacks from this group on other governments on behalf of kind of the Russian government after their declaration of supporting Russia. Did they actually do anything?
Well, what do you mean by like government, like actual government critical infrastructure, or sometimes hospitals? Because that's what happens. They usually attack hospitals.
Hospitals and such, and infrastructure in Ukraine, or doing work with Georgia. So have they attacked Georgia? So I'm just wondering, do these groups actually act on behalf of the government, or are they just trying to get money out of it?
Well, they are saying that they are profit-driven. But again, as we can see, this like relationship with the state is it's not clear-cut. You can just say that we are state supporting, and then we are doing attacks on the behalf of the government, unless there was official request to do that, or an official request. But to my knowledge, and again, it's all of it is kind of a speculation. There's no ground truth to figure out if those groups are actually those groups, those members. But if I remember, this like Black Suit did some sort of a attack on the hospitals in Ukraine. But we can't really say that this is a government. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
I'm kind of curious if any of these groups in the Russian eCrime community, if they have good or bad relationships with each other, and if they ever, if those bad relationships make them ever attack other Russian eCrime groups.
So the question was if they have bad or good relationships, right? And if they do have bad relationships, then what?
If they attack other Russian eCrime groups.
Oh, okay. So the conflict happens when they attack essentially the same company. And that's usually the fights are happening between affiliates, the ones who are actually distributing the malware, not the ones that are operators, the ones that are producing the malware. But also, yeah, fights happen. I would say, yeah, they do happen. And they attack each other not in terms of like actually attacking, but more of a, like stealing each other's code or scamming each other. But in a bigger picture, like big groups, I don't see that happening in the big groups. It usually happens in the smaller scale groups. Yep.
So you talked earlier about like the countries that they were attacking, and I'm just wondering, is there a specific concentration, since they're like affiliated with the Russian government, or not affiliated, but like you know, supporting the Russian government here? Do they attack Russia's enemies more like specifically? Like, is there like a concentration geographically of where their attacks are?
Well, it turns out after the invasion of Ukraine, there is. And this is, in this paper, they show the whole evidence. They're just measuring how many attacks of Russian-based ransomware groups happen after invasion. And happen a lot, especially in the countries where there's a democratic elections. So yeah, we can assume that after the invasion, this like whole Russian mobilization mobilized the ransomware groups as well.
Okay.
But we can't really say which specific one. Yeah, it's hard.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, like, yeah. Not all of them are attacking actual governments. They're attacking the businesses in those countries. Yeah.
What are the relationships between these eCrime groups in Russia with eCrime groups in like other countries or other parts of the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. So historically, Russian-speaking space, Russian-speaking forums, used to be a place for the people that actually code, that people that produce exploits, and this like Western world are the people that cash out. Technically, to this day, it's still kind of same. And this economic relationship with cashing out and actually producing malware is still there. And the same ransom operators might provide like ransomware as a service to Western e-crimers. Yep.
Thank you for your presentation. And my question is, what ways you use to authenticate the leaked data? How do you know it's not a misdirection? You have a particular way, since it's kind of secretive groups.
What are the ways to authenticate? Sorry, what? Sorry.
When you do your analysis, you're using the leaked data, right?
Uh-huh.
And how do you authenticate those data that is really saying what it's supposed to be, rather than it's a misdirection from the group that actually lead you to a different direction?
Oh, so like what if this data leak is a false data leak? Like okay, I see. No, yeah, we just assume it's true. And it's been out there on people, like different research teams already jumped in it. And yeah, we just assume it's true. And that's what we do in science. We sometimes have to assume that this is what it is, and we're just going to go with it.
One of the articles that we read in the cybersecurity class for this meeting said that Americans were the primary target of ransomware attacks. Like in terms of like how many attacks happen, most of them are on Americans. Do you have any insight as to why that might be the case?
Well, it's a complicated factor. First of all, that's because American infrastructure, cyber infrastructure, was weak. And a lot of like schools, a lot of hospitals and like businesses, they don't patch, they don't update, and their systems are very old. And it's just easy target. And if you are doing business, you will go with the minimal cost, right? So yeah, that's why it is as it is. But yeah, like I can also comment on the political agenda, but I don't think I have to. There's definitely this factor too. Does that answer your question? I know it's not fully answered the question, but yeah, it's a complicated fact.
Do you know, like, I guess roughly how much these companies are making based off of large corporations or smaller attacks on individuals?
Well, they don't want to attack the individual because this is just a small money, unless they're like script kiddies, the ones that are like started from the bottom, like trying to figure out their way in. They might attack individuals, but how many individuals do you see with actual server? I mean, some families do have a server, like when they put all the files and like family photos. Yeah, but like essentially this is not a lucrative target, attacking individuals. So mostly if they start with individuals, they try to shift to actual organizations or businesses. And depending on the business, and I think I have to mention that there are different types of roles, and one of the roles is OSINT researchers that gather intelligence through open source information of potential targets, evaluating their cyber infrastructure, vendor relationships, but also assessing the likelihood of paying different amount of ransom. So they do their homework, they calculate how much revenue there is and how much the company can pay. So yeah, it's not just like a fixed price.
A couple of times while you were speaking, you made distinctions between Russian-speaking and Russian e-crime groups. Are you primarily studying groups that are based in Russia or that speak Russian?
There's a blurred line because Russian-speaking language, Russian language forums are like everyone who speaks Russian, and they might not be Russians or might not be being based in Russia. But the groups, the ransomware groups like this, they themselves they claim to be Russian-based, and in this case, we just say, okay, they're Russian-based. Of course, the members are not all Russians. They might be different nationalities. And actually looking through the chats and like comparing the timestamps, we can see that they live in the different time zones and sometimes outside of Russia, like Eastern European countries. So it's really blurred line, and I do say Russian-based only when I talk about the groups, but if we talk about the forums, it's more of a Russian language forums.
All right, I think that's about all the time we've got. Please help me thank our speaker again one more time.
All right.
And thanks for coming to the cybersecurity seminar. If you're here for CSSE 145, stick around. We'll start back up in about 10 minutes. The rest of you, hope to see you next time.